Picture the public square, not the one you know, not the one of tourists and farmers' markets and gentle afternoon sunlight. Imagine, instead, the smell. It is the first thing that hits you, a complex, overwhelming miasma, the stench of unwashed bodies, of animal dung from the cobbles, of rotting vegetables and human waste tossed from the windows above, and beneath it all, the sharp, copper-like tang of fear. Imagine you are locked into a wooden frame, your head and hands secured, facing a sea of jeering, laughing, hating faces. It is midday. The sun is relentless. You cannot wipe the spit from your eye. You cannot swat the fly that has landed on the rotten, pulpy cabbage stuck to your cheek. You cannot shield yourself from the dead cat, hurled from the back of the crowd, that strikes you in the chest. You are the star of the show, and the show is your total, abject humiliation. This was not justice as we understand it. It was a performance. It was a brutal piece of street theatre, and it was one of the most effective and most misunderstood weapons of social control for nearly 1,000 years. We have sanitized these events. We have filed them away under primitive justice, the chaotic, emotional outbursts of a barbarous people. But this is a profound and dangerous misreading. The pillory, the ducking stool, the branding iron, the scold's bridle. These were not the random acts of a frenzied mob. They were a calculated strategy of systematic erasure. This was not about punishment, not really. It was about dehumanization. It was a formal process of social death, the surgical removal of an individual from the community, from the body politic, from the human race itself, all while they were still forced to live. Contemporary civic records, court ledgers, and parish accounts, found in archives from London to Nuremberg, reveal the chilling truth. They detail not chaos, but order. They list the exact cost of the wood for the stocks, the blacksmith's fee for forging the Brank's bridle, the price of the rope for the ducking stool. This was not madness. This was bureaucracy. It was a cold, itemized, and deliberate architecture of shame, designed, with terrifying precision, to turn a human being into a living ghost. This psychological vivisection was executed in layers, each a distinct mechanism of cruelty, each designed to dismantle a different part of the self. The most common of these devices was the pillory, or its low-born cousin, the stocks. We see it today as almost comical, a prop for a medieval fair. But this was a machine of profound psychological torment. Its mechanism was not pain. It was stillness. The offender was locked in place, their head and hands or their feet secured, forced into a posture of submission. They were a captive audience, but the true captive was the crowd. The strategic purpose of the pillory was to outsource the state's violence. The judge did not sentence you to be beaten or spat upon or blinded. He sentenced you to be there. The rest was left to the people. The state did not bloody its own hands. It simply locked you in place and, with a silent institutional nod, invited the town to do its worst. It was, in effect, a terrifying social barometer. The crowd's reaction was the punishment, and it was wildly, lethally unpredictable. Consider the case of Daniel Defoe, the author of Robinson Crusoe. In 1703, he was sentenced to the pillory for seditious libel against the Church of England. But Defoe was a popular figure. The crowd that gathered did not come with excrement and stones. They came with flowers. They decorated the pillory. They drank to his health and sang his hymns. His shaming was transformed into a victory parade. Now, consider John Waller. In 1630, he was sentenced to the pillory in London for perjury. The crowd had decided his crime, bearing false witness, was unforgivable. They did not throw flowers. They did not just throw refuse. They threw stones, broken pottery, and heavy roof tiles. The guards, as was common, stood aside. By the time the spectacle was over and the crowd dispersed, John Waller was dead. His skull was fractured in multiple places. The analysis is chilling. The state, in both cases, performed the exact same act. The pillory was a tool of consensus. It did not just punish a crime, it licensed the mob to be the judge, jury, and, when it chose, the executioner. It was a ritual of exclusion, and its outcome was entirely dependent on a single terrifying question. Does this person still belong to us? This layer was not temporary. This was a lifelong sentence, a permanent mutilation of identity, burned directly into the flesh. The branding iron was the ultimate tool of social categorization. Its mechanism was not just pain, it was information. It turned the human body into a walking criminal record. The English Vagabonds Act of 1547 was a law of terrifying precision. It decreed that any able-bodied person, man or woman, found to be idle or without a master for 3 days was to be taken to the nearest town. There, they were to be publicly branded on the chest with a V for vagrant. They were then enslaved for 2 years to the person who had found them. The law further stated that if they ran away, they were to be branded again, this time on the cheek or forehead, with an S for slave. They were then enslaved for life. This was the true social death. The strategic purpose was the complete and total erasure of a future. A brand on the face was a living confession. You could never get a job. You could never blend into a new town. You could never be trusted. You could never be anything other than your crime. In 18th century France, this logic was refined. A convicted thief might be branded with a V for voleur, but the true mark of damnation was the fleur-de-lis, the symbol of the king, branded on the shoulder of those who had committed the most serious crimes against the state. This is not fiction. This is the horrifying reality that inspired the character of Milady de Winter in The Three Musketeers. For a woman to be branded was a unique kind of damnation. It marked her not only as a criminal, but as a spoiled and ruined public property. There is a documented 1724 case from the archives of the Bastille detailing a woman named Angilette Carey. Convicted of theft and prostitution, she was sentenced to be publicly whipped and branded with the fleur-de-lis. The records describe her being tied to the post, her back bared. The crowd watched as the iron, glowing red, was pressed into her shoulder. The analysis is clear. The iron did not just burn her skin. It burned away her identity as a woman, as a citizen, as a human. It made her a permanent, walking thing. This brings us to a layer of cruelty, so specific, so targeted, that it reveals the deepest anxieties of the age. This was the gendered architecture of shame, reserved almost exclusively for women. The crime, the female voice. A woman who was a common scold, a gossip, a nag, or simply too argumentative, was seen not as an annoyance, but as a direct threat to the patriarchal order. The law had 2 primary machines for her. The first was the ducking stool. This was a horrifying piece of engineering. A simple wooden chair, fixed to the end of a long pivoting beam, like a giant seesaw of torment, positioned at the edge of a river or a filthy village pond. The convicted woman was strapped tightly into the chair. The entire town gathered to watch. This was not a somber event. It was a festival, a day of entertainment. The beam was lowered, plunging the woman into the cold, murky, excrement-filled water. She was held under until she began to drown, her lungs burning, panic setting in. Then, just before she lost consciousness, she was raised back up, gasping for air, water streaming from her, her clothes plastered to her body in a form of forced, sexualized humiliation, only to be mocked and jeered by the crowd. Then she was plunged back in, again and again. The town records of Kingston upon Thames from 1645 detail the case of Anne Biddlestone. She was presented by the court as a common scold. Her sentence was the ducking stool. The records state she was submerged repeatedly in the freezing river until she was almost dead. She survived the water. But the ordeal, combined with the shame and the resulting sickness from the polluted water, often proved fatal. She was released, not as a neighbor, but as a broken spectacle, a warning to every other woman in the crowd. But for a more personal, more intimate humiliation, there was the scold's bridle, or Brank's bridle. This was a grotesque iron cage, a mask of torment, forged by the local blacksmith. It was locked onto the head. Inside the mask, a flat iron plate, often called the bridle bit, was forced into the mouth and pressed down on the tongue. On many surviving examples, this plate is covered in sharp iron spikes. To move your tongue was to shred it. To speak was to inflict agonizing bloody wounds upon yourself. In 1653, the Quaker preacher Dorothy Waugh was arrested in Carlisle. Her crime was not scolding, but blasphemy, preaching in the public square. This was a woman usurping male authority. The city magistrate sentenced her to be branked. An iron bridle was locked to her head. A jailer then led her by a chain through the market square, whipping her. The strategic purpose of these devices was the pathologizing of the female voice. The ducking stool drowned the voice with the filth of the community. The bridle mutilated the very organ of speech. The message was unequivocal. A woman's silence was a virtue, her voice a crime. This brings us to the final layer, the one where all these elements, public spectacle, ritualized humiliation, and mob violence, coalesce into a single, terrifying event. This was the charivari, or rough music, taken to its most extreme and violent conclusion. This was tarring and feathering. We think of it as a comical Yankee Doodle punishment. The reality was a form of methodical, agonizing torture that often proved fatal. The mechanism was a grotesque inversion of ritual. First, the mob would seize the victim. They would strip him naked, a public, emasculating act. Then came the tar. This was not the asphalt we know. It was pine tar, a substance used to seal the hulls of ships. To make it liquid, it had to be heated to a boil. It was then daubed or poured over the victim's entire body. The scalding liquid, at over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, caused immediate, horrific second and third degree burns. It clung to the skin, continuing to burn deep into the flesh. Then, the psychological element, the feathers. A man was not just a man. A beast was not just a beast. The feathers were a mark of in-betweenness. The victim was turned into a ridiculous, non-human thing. A monster, a grotesque parody of a bird, deserving only of ridicule. The victim was then, if he was still conscious, paraded through the town on a rail, a painful, splintery perch that would further tear his burned skin. Boston, January of 1774. The anger against the British Crown is a fever. The victim is John Malcolm, a customs official, a loyalist, a king's man. He is despised. A patriot mob seizes him from his home. This is not a quick, passionate assault. It is a slow, methodical ritual. They strip him naked in the freezing winter night. They pour the hot, bubbling pine tar over his entire body, searing his skin. Then, they cover him in feathers. They place a rope around his neck and drag him through the streets to the Liberty Tree, the symbol of their rebellion.
For hours, they parade him, they beat him with clubs and ropes. The tar and feathers mix with his own blood. John Malcolm is a customs official. The mob is protesting the Tea Act. So, amidst the beatings, as he is freezing to death, his skin sloughing off, they pry his teeth open. They take a canister of captured, hated British tea. They boil it. And they pour the scalding, black liquid down his throat, burning him from the inside out. The symbolism was the true masterstroke. He survived the night, a miracle, but he was a ruined man, his body a map of permanent scars. The event was the point. The mob had proven, with systematic, theatrical precision, that it could dismantle a man, his body, his dignity, and his very identity. These were not failures of a primitive system, they were the system working with terrifying, calculated precision. This was the thematic inevitability of state-sponsored shame. It was a ritual of exclusion, designed to prove that the crowd, the mob, held the true power of life and death. The state merely provided the stage, the tools, and the permission. It demonstrates a chilling, enduring truth, that the deepest prison is not made of stone, but of shame, that society is a fragile, terrifying consensus, and that this consensus can, with the right encouragement, be turned into a weapon. It forces us, even today, to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. We have torn down the pillories. We have outlawed the brand. We have stored the scold's bridle in museums, But have we truly abandoned the architecture of public shame? Or have we just digitized it? When we swarm an anonymous stranger on the internet, when we join the digital mob to destroy a reputation, a career, a life over a single, decontextualized mistake. When we participate in the collective, gleeful, and righteous shaming of a modern-day scapegoat, are we any different from the crowd in that square? The technology has changed, but the human impulse, the terrifying communal hunger to identify, isolate, and destroy, that remains. The theater has simply followed us home. History is a mirror, not a map. It shows us who we are, not just where we've been. If you believe, as we do, that these uncomfortable truths must be faced, subscribe. Join us as we continue to dissect the shadows that history has tried to leave behind.